All right. So welcome to Nerf Club. Today we're going to be modifying the Nerf Rival Artemis. Comes shooting reasonably powerful around the Rival par of around 100 feet per second. Hopefully we can get this guy up to about 120 or 130 FPS. The pistol grip on this guy, trying to get it off, is extremely difficult to open. I don't think they intend for you to be able to get this apart. The way it clips together is press fit, so there's really no other way to get this pistol grip off without a little bit of brute force and ignorance. So take the screws out as best you can. If you don't have one, I recommend you get a magnetic tray for the screws, and doing your work on a blanket like this one just means if you drop a screw or drop a small metal part, it's not going to go swinging around everywhere. Trying to get the covers off. They're kind of sprung on and they'll try and pop back on wherever possible. So I'm using kind of larger toothpicks to stop them from doing that. Getting them on both sides here, just using my screwdriver as a pry bar, trying to get in there and stopping these from popping back on, hopefully. And get into the other side here. You're gonna have to be a little bit rough with it to get this part off, so don't worry about breaking anything. If you do, this part is expendable. These covers, it'll work just fine without them. There we go. And you'll see why this is so challenging to get off once I pop it apart. So just make sure it's not caught on those individual divots on the inside. And then you'll need to use your screwdriver to try and work the grip apart itself and kind of work it back to the middle section here. There you go. And you're gonna hear some kind of nasty popping noises as you're getting it apart. Hopefully you can see in there that you're separating it out. And then we'll pry this apart, ideally. Get off that side. And there we go. All right. And that did not break anything, although it seemed to. The challenging part about these is they fit on, and on the inside where you can't access, they pop onto these posts and simultaneously catch on the outside. You can slide these on afterwards, but they are a pain. This thing will work on its own just fine. If you slide these together, the posts go in and it kind of clicks together, but then you have a little bit of a rough patch on your hand that eventually gets covered by these that kind of slides in and clips on. We'll set those aside for now. And now we can actually get into the blaster itself. Do not take apart the magazine. You can leave it intact while you're modifying the blasters, so just leave that up at the top. There's a slider that allows you to get ammo inside one at a time as you pull this back, and sliding it back pulls the springs with the magazines down and it locks in place, but you can leave that alone. Now you got to go through and undo each of these screws. And that's going to take a little bit of time. Have a narrower screwdriver for some of these if it's a bit snug. They're all Phillips, as is tradition with Nerf. Some of them may stay inside, but most of the screws will come out. And I should have probably time-lapsed this so you're not just watching screws come out, but it'll be fine. You don't need to take out the screws on the holder up front. That'll come out as a single unit, so don't worry about that. And there we go. So that one's a longer one at the top of the barrel. And that one wants to stay. Now this is also true on the Hades, but there's a screw on either side. Normally all of the screws are on the left-hand side of the blaster, but on this side there's another screw that's going to hold the magazine inside, so make sure you get both of those. And good. That's out. Go to the back of the blaster. And if you kind of work in a clockwise pattern, getting them all, you're more likely to get every single screw rather than missing one. It's a little bit irritating when you're trying to pull it apart if you end up just getting part of them. And that one wants to stay, that's okay. Hopefully you can see as I'm going through here. We'll see if we can get this done on our lunch. Ideally. And hopefully we haven't missed any as we've been going around. One last one here. And you can give a quick kind of visual assessment to make sure you got them. I got that one. All right, and now you can work the side of the blaster off. There we go. So there's the top side of the blaster. You can just set that aside. Now you can see the internals of it. This is the safety, and we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to take that out, and you can see how the trigger mechanism works here. This is actually really similar to the catch that's on the inside of the Helios as well. Basically, this pushes up here. It'll release the catch of the spring on the inside here. All right, and this piece here, when you're trying to pull it out, it's kind of sprung on the inside, sits in, so you're gonna pull that up, rotate it halfway, and then it's gonna come out completely. You can set that aside, and you can set the barrel on the inside. This is what rotates and basically picks up an individual shot each time from the inside, and you can see the hop up right there. Each of these barrels has an individual hop up to put backspin on it. And set that aside. And now you can take the assembly out. Ideally, let's see here. Pop that guy off. We'll leave the trigger out. And there we go. Okay. Now, this piece has popped out. And perfect. So just make sure that you have this as it goes in here. And basically, what's happening here as this moves, it gets driven up or down on it. Perfect. Yeah, just like so. So you can put that back on later if you want to. No problem. Just sits on the inside like this, and you can see as it rotates on this catch right here, it forces it up. Gets it out of the way of the teeth on the bottom there. So we're going to set that aside, and we're going to set this aside for now while we're going in. Now, as you're trying to get this apart, there's a couple things you need to do. In order to get the piston out of this, there's a little screw on the inside here that hopefully you can see on the inside. We're going to have to go in and get that out. And we're just going to pull that out. That's a smaller one, so I'm going to keep it separate from the others. And actually, getting this out takes a little bit of doing. So you can see, hopefully, that this is a separate piece that's bolted into the rest of the guide. To be able to get it out, you're going to have to kind of get in there and wiggle it loose a little bit. You can see it coming. There we go. And yeah. There we go. All right, so again, this track here basically bolts onto the inside. We're going to set this apart for now. And now comes the surgery on the inside here, so you can take that entire track off. now that you've removed this piece. Otherwise, you won't be able to move the track off of this. You can kind of see now how this actually fits on right here to allow it to essentially pull back and then catch on the catch mechanism. You can see the spring on the inside as well. Now I have to take off the front face to access the spring. Super simple, right, guys?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So we're going to save that spring, or save that screw, pardon me, and save this screw. And you want to be careful anytime you're pulling the front faceplate of these off, because there are some components on the inside that are sprung, and if you just pop things off willy-nilly, you can end up losing pieces. So I'm going to save those 4 springs, and then I'm going to gently lift off the faceplate right here. Again, it goes on just like that. I'm going to set this down over by the springs, pop this off, and again, if you can keep everything roughly in the orientation that it came off, this spring is sitting in on its own. There we go. We can see the plunger now on the inside, and we can see the shell. I'm just going to set that right there, and we can pop out the piston. Perfect. Now we've got several different options in terms of springs. This is a stock K26 spring that's the same length as the spring that's in there. I'm going to take a custom cut K26 and put it in there. A little bit longer, should give this thing a little bit of extra juice. And then you can kind of pop onto the catch at the bottom there. You'll see, especially if you've leveled off the spring where you've cut it, it'll sit reasonably flush. There we go. And slide in, perfect, just like so. And then into the shell here. Now, there's only one way that this will work. You can see there's a groove right on top of the piston, and essentially that's the only way that you can fit it through. Slide this in on top, and again, these grooves fit naturally into the grooves there. So we're sitting in, and that extra long spring means that there's going to be a little bit of compression on the spring right from the start. And we'll fit this over top. Did I do this correctly? I think so. Yeah, there we go. All right. And that spring needs to fit on the post right here. So we'll make sure that this goes in and sits down like so. And again, because there's a little bit of tension on that spring, you're gonna have to hold it with one hand and then pop the screw in, get that first one in, and then you can go across to the next one to hold everything in. There we go, and then we won't have to hold it by hand anymore once we get that in. There we go. I'm gonna go over here next. Hopefully you can still see just fine as I'm going through. And I must be misthreaded there. Let's see. There we go. Just a little bit out. And you don't need to super tighten. Remember that these are plastic components, so you don't need to death grip the screws in there. Just snug is good. Now everything's in. There's our air restrictor, and there's some tension on that spring there as we go, even at the get-go. Now we're going to put our shuttle back on, and this is going to sit there and there, and we are going to need to get back in with this guy. And you're going to need to push that piston out a little bit in order to get this on. Do I have enough space? I think so. All right. there we go. We're in. All right, and now we have to pop that screw back in. Here we go. So that screw that we took out over here, we can pop in using our needle nose pliers to get it started into the spot right there. And then we'll pop in at a bit of an angle with our Phillips to get that snugged in. And there we go. So now we've got our piston in place. And if we're looking at where we're sitting on the track here, I'm gonna just make sure what we're looking for is that this mark right here is sitting right above this mark down here, and we're good in terms of that. Now we're gonna bring back our shell. We've got our stronger spring into our blaster. And here we go. We're gonna make sure that this post fits in at the back here, and that slides in. Everything else is in position. Good. And then we're gonna put in our barrel right here. I just popped out our tactical rail at the top. That's in. And you wanna make sure there's just a little guide that sits in these grooves. Make sure that it's actually in one of those proper grooves rather than just in between, so make sure it's in one of these angled sliding tracks as we go. Now we need to make sure that this catch is sitting there, and again, these kind of angled pieces sitting in there. And this grooved piece right here, you see as it twists, pushes it out, needs to slide over top of this spring and then down. And you'll need to just use a screwdriver to push that into the center. Now you're in the middle, and you'll notice that these kind of teeth along the inside right here are what this is going to catch on as it moves, so it does need to be in line with those. We'll put our front guide on, and again, just 90 degrees to get it in from the start. And it's gonna slide in, pops in, catches over. And we'll get in our stock, or pardon me, our sling mount at the back there. Pop it in. We're gonna pop in our trigger. All right, there we go. And what the heck, we can put a safety in here as well. May as well. All right, here we go. All right, and then we're gonna slide our casing over top, and if all goes well, this should all just pop on. If we've left everything in the correct position, you should hear some satisfying kind of clicks together as we go. And we had that one super long screw that was at the very top. I'm gonna put that one in first just to keep it separated from the others. So we're gonna pop that one right in here. You may find if you're not in the exact thread grooves that you were in taking the screws out, that they're a little bit rough going in, so just back them off if they're feeling a little bit tight, and then guide them in again. All right. Good, and keep going until you feel it snug. And there are piles and piles of these screws, so you're just gonna have to go through. And again, if you just kind of pick a direction clockwise or counterclockwise and be consistent, you will eventually get there. It's a little bit tedious when you have one that has lots of screws holding it together, but come on. Is there one already down there? All right. There we go. And you kind of hear things kind of creaking and shifting together if it wasn't perfectly together as you put these screws in and snug it up. And we'll have our moment of truth in a little bit where we'll see if everything is put back together properly. We should have a functional blaster that hopefully has a little bit more juice to it. Anything kind of beyond 15 or 20 feet has a little bit of droop to the shot if it doesn't have a heavier spring in it. But it will make this one a little bit harder to prime. But luckily, because it's got that big pistol grip, it's pretty easy to get a good handle on this. As with all rival blasters, because they shoot pretty hard, you shouldn't be using these without eye protection. Preferably the full face shields make things a little bit more comfortable. You definitely not super enjoyable to get one of these in the face, so wearing protection and good safety equipment is great. Getting shot in the body with a rival blaster can sting a little bit, but it's not going to cause any harm. You definitely do not want to get shot in the eye. Alright, we'll put the body ones back in here to get that magazine clipped in. And before we flip over to the other side, we're just going to finish the main side of the blaster here. There's 3 screws that go into the pistol grip, so we should have 3 remaining once we're done putting in all the body screws for the Artemis here. So there's 4, because there's 1 for the magazine on the other side. The last one here, and I'm just gonna check the snugness on that super long one here. There we go. We'll put that last screw in here. All right. And then we're going to put on the pistol grip. And you can just do a quick check for yourself. On the side of the blaster that has the majority of the screw holes, you're going to need the pistol grip that has those there. And just slide this in and on like so. And in and on like so, making sure that it lines up and that the grooves are there, and then click, click, you're together. Now, these guys, basically, you can just check. There's a larger square one, and it goes on and clicks on, and reverse here, clicks on. Now you're covered up again. Taking those off is terrible, but they go on pretty nicely. And then you can put the screws in to hold this pistol grip on, although to be fair, with how hard it was to get this thing apart, I'm pretty sure it would work even without the screws, but may as well have them all together. Alright, there we go, and final one. And Jaden, would you mind grabbing me some rival rounds from my desk there? Get me 10 or so of those, please. And we'll load this guy up. Let's just give it a prime and take the safety off. It primes and fires, that's good. So that ideally means that all of the parts are put in correctly. Awesome. So we're just going to load in a few rounds to this one to check that it works. All right. Definitely a little bit heavier prime on this one, and then let's see. Definitely a much improved blaster. I think that this one's going to be performing better. We may revisit this and improve some of our other Artemises, or Artemi, but it's definitely a heavier prime. So if you've got a smaller person who's using these, you may not want to upgrade the spring to this degree because it'll be much more challenging. Definitely eye protection necessary. At this point, really, even without an upgraded spring, you should be wearing eye protection when using rivals, but there it is. You saw the internals and how to upgrade these. It's definitely one of the more complicated rival blasters, so you probably don't want to tackle taking one of these apart until you have some experience dealing with it. And yeah, thanks for joining us.
This one?